Welcome. This video is documenting the prediction that famous singer-songwriter Paul Simon of Simon and Garfunkel will slip and fall and severely injure his head on December 19th, 2025. The post date on the social media platform that you are watching this video on proves that this prediction is being made ahead of time, as does this time-stamped email and forensic notes PDF document. If you are skeptical for some reason, please email me and I will forward these to you. If you have already watched this introductory information regarding November 27th, you can skip ahead no more than precisely 10 minutes. Welcome. This video that you are watching was produced prior to November 27th, 2025, when prior to this date, it was predicted that Paul Simon of Simon and Garfunkel, the famous singer and songwriter, would slip and fall and severely injure his head on this November 27th, 2025 date, Thanksgiving. This is because God's signs, his true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, which is only being explained on this channel, overwhelmingly indicated that November 27th would be extremely important regarding this trail of signs leading to the date that Paul Simon will slip and fall and injure his head, which is now predicted to be December 19th, 2025. 22 days after November 27th. That's why the clear and relevant signs that occurred on November 27th that related to Paul Simon revealed adding 22 more days to reach December 19th. The signs we received on November 27th are explained in other videos in more detail. But for the sake of this introduction here, I will briefly describe them. But before I do, the key thing to understand here is that when Paul Simon slips and falls and injures his head on December 19th, it will prove that all of the analysis in this video for November 27th is 100% correct and true. That's the purpose of this prediction. In other words, the reason why God does this, why he lays out a trail of signs, it is in order to elaborate on the prophetic signs, because none of the prophetic signs can be properly or fully understood without their context and connections to the other prophetic signs. It is through these connections and context that God is able to tell these stories and themes. And God does this in order to relay extremely important information and knowledge that everyone needs to know. And everyone needs to know how and why God pointed in advance to November 27th, why he did so. And it is explained in these videos that talk about God pointing to November 27th. Now, the skeptic will say, oh, well, he didn't he didn't slip and fall on that day. You were wrong. No. When the prediction comes to pass on December 19th, 22 days later, it will prove all of the analysis for November 27th. And therefore, it will prove that God was indeed pointing to November 27th regarding the slip and fall and injury of his head of Paul Simon. And therefore, all of the knowledge that's contained in these stories that were told in the lead up to November 27th are extremely important. And that's why when the prediction comes to pass, the wise person will recognize that they need to watch every minute of every video on this channel, including all of the videos that predicted November 27th. It was not quote unquote wrong. It was 100% correct. And that will be proven to be true when Paul Simon slips and falls and injures his head on December 19th. Now, why the 22 days from November 27th? Well, one of the signs we received on that day was the first American Pope's first trip abroad to 2 nations. And on the plane flight, the news story was that he was gifted the historic bat used by player number 2. The Chicago White Sox player number 2 was gifted to the Pope, the first American Pope, on his first trip abroad to 2 nations. There's much more to that. He was on, for example, his way to the 1700th anniversary celebration of the Nicene Creed. And on that day, one of the 2 National Guardsmen died who was shot on 17th Street. And on, as explained in the other video. So we have the 2 and 2, number 2's bat and the 2-nation trip. The first American Pope from Chicago hints at the first black president from Chicago, and on. And the Pope and Obama are the 2 antichrists, except the first of the 2 antichrists, the Pope, is not Pope Leo, but will be Pope Francis, who will, or is predicted to become, or be, resurrected in April 2029. That's another subject. Okay, so we have, anyway, the 2 antichrists identified once again in God's signs. Now, Paul Simon was known to be an avid baseball fan. That's one reason why this is relevant. Also, his head injury is symbolic of people's heads being injured and their brains being injured from the things. You know what I'm talking about, the things. And the components in the things make their way to people's brains. And that will ultimately lead to demonic possession, and on, as explained in countless other Paul Simon videos. But the mark of the Antichrist, which is the thing, is symbolized by the number 22 in God's signs. And the Antichrists, the 2 Antichrists, will enforce the mark of the Antichrist. The reason why the mark of the Antichrist is symbolized by the number 22 is because the inverse of the mark of the Antichrist is described in the book of Ezekiel, which would have been a Tav mark, and the Tav letter in the Hebrew alphabet is the last and 22nd letter of the Hebrew alphabet. The mark of the Antichrist is described in the last and 22nd book out of 22 books in the Bible that have a total of 22 chapters. Also, the mark of the Antichrist alters a person's chromosomes, and chromosomes come in pairs, and each chromosome has 2 arms, and so 2 and 2, 22. Now, another sign we received on this date was the death of Fuzzy Zoeller, the famous Hall of Famer golfer, professional golfer, Fuzzy Zoeller, who was known for making, and never lived it down for the rest of his life, his racist comment after he had finished the Masters and while Tiger Woods was still playing the Masters on his way to winning his first Masters tournament. The first black player to win the Masters. Again, hints at the first black president, Antichrist. Also, Tiger Woods is the GOAT, greatest of all time, and that hints at the GOAT Antichrist. Now, Fuzzy Zoeller was one of 2 players in the modern era to win the Masters in their first year as a professional. The other player was Tiger Woods. And Tiger Woods is known for his big comeback when he won the Masters 22 years after he first won the Masters in his first year as a professional. And so that's why the death of Fuzzy Zoeller also reveals adding 22 days. Now, there's so much more that's so amazing regarding all of this that is, for one thing, explained in the must-watch, as if all of them are must-watch, as you should know. 2 National Guardsmen shot, 2-nation trip by the Pope video regarding Paul Simon. Okay, so I'll leave it at that. That's the introduction here. Again, like I said, God was pointing to November 27th ahead of time. So the rest of this video will talk about how and why God pointed to November 27th ahead of time. And all of the analysis is 100% correct when the prediction comes to pass 22 days later on December 19th. And so Don't be confused when in this video later on I talk about how Paul Simon is predicted to slip and fall on November 27th. God was saying that. That's what God was saying. It was not, quote unquote, wrong, quote unquote. It was 100% correct. Okay, God was saying that Paul Simon would slip and fall on November 27th. But the way it works, and this is how it works, and I know far better than you or anyone how it works, is that it's not necessarily possible to know ahead of time, ahead of the date that God is pointing to, whether or not it will be the end of the trail of signs for that prediction or another step in the trail. And so November 27th was pointed to, and it was for Paul Simon's trail, and it ended up being a step. Now, December 19th might be a step. But at this time, we're going to go with the prediction that Paul Simon will slip and fall and injure his head on December 19th. If it doesn't happen, you can rest assured there will be clear and relevant signs related to it on December 19th. And that said, enjoy the rest of the video. It must be watched. It's extremely important information, all of these videos. All right, welcome. This video is predicting that famous singer-songwriter Paul Simon of Simon and Garfunkel will slip and fall and severely injure his head on November 27th, 2025, Thanksgiving Day, and it is predicted that the news of this will be first reported the following day on Black Friday, November 28th. As we can see here, this email was composed on November 15th. Okay, and this proves that this prediction is being made ahead of time. That said, it has been known for a number of months that God is communicating through his prophetic signs that Paul Simon will slip and fall and injure his head. All right, and there have been other steps in the trail of signs that has been leading to this, including, for example, October 31st. There are videos on this channel that communicate, or rather, I should say, explain what God was communicating regarding October 31st ahead of time. And the signs on that date confirmed adding 9 plus 9 plus 9 days to reach Thanksgiving. And one of the signs was Trump's interview for the first time since the lawsuit with CBS in his mansion in the 9 plus 9 plus 9th state, Florida. Paul Simon is associated with this theme of mansions in God's signs, as Paul Simon's best-selling album was named after the king of rock and roll's mansion, Graceland. The lawsuit was for 4 times $4 million with CBS, and that's why on the same day, October 31st, Trump trumpeted, because Trump is God's trumpet for prophetic signs, that he had renovated the bathroom named after the 4 times 4th president, President Lincoln, in the White House mansion. This is because the Antichrist, the 44th president, and by the way, the Graceland mansion is in the 4 times 4th state. The King Antichrist, as in the king of rock and roll, will reside in the White House mansion. He is the 44th president. The White House has 44 plus 44 plus 44 rooms. God repeats a number 3 times for emphasis of its symbolic meaning. And the White House mansion is located at 4 times 400 Pennsylvania Avenue. In other words, this is how God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works, which is only being explained on this channel. It works on this layout, if you will, or big picture of signs that are interconnected, because none of God's prophetic signs can be properly or fully understood without their context and connections with the other prophetic signs. And this enables God, through these steps, including October 31st, to tell these stories, which are extremely important because of the knowledge contained in them that is communicated through the stories that is only being explained on this channel. In other words, when the prediction comes to pass that Paul Simon will fall and injure his head on November 27th, it will prove or rather confirm, or rather, I should say confirm, that all of the analysis for October 31st was 100% correct. And therefore, all of the videos that predicted October 31st must be watched. When the prediction comes to pass, the wise person will recognize that every minute of every video on this channel must be watched. I will just add, although it doesn't need to be said really, but the skeptic, the extreme skeptic, will say, well, you predicted October 31st, and then it didn't happen, and now you're predicting November 27th, and so you just got lucky. You're just picking these dates, and eventually you'll get lucky. That's absolutely ludicrous. You need to have your mind checked, in my opinion, because I'm also not only predicting the death of an old man, which in itself is something, because he is only 84. He could live another 6 to 16 years. And I'm not predicting every date. It's only October 31st and November 27th. But also I'm predicting that he'll slip and fall and injure his head. And so the person that is still a skeptic after the prediction comes to pass, because I predicted October 31st, needs to have their head checked. Why do I say this? Because it also proves that the righteous Christian God of the Bible is the true God. That's the purpose of this prediction. The first and foremost, the obvious one, which goes without saying. But I clarify that it is the righteous Christian God of the Bible, because many people in our world today are very confused as to the nature of God. And we need to be clear here that it is predicting, or rather proving, this prediction will prove that the righteous Christian God of the Bible is the true God. Not some God that is made up in one's own imagination, like the New Age God, the quote-unquote spiritual person's God, the energy God, the collective consciousness God, the Indian religion, the Hindu, Buddhist religion that's replaced Christianity in the West God. Not that God. Neither is the Muslim God. It is the righteous Christian God of the Bible. And believe me, I know far better than anyone the reason and purpose for this prediction that is from God. And it isn't only to prove that the righteous Christian God of the Bible is the true God, but it is also to prove the controversial things that I'll be saying in these videos. Make no mistake. I know more than you the reason and purpose for this prediction. And it is to prove the controversial things that I'll be saying, because these controversial things are overwhelmingly proved through God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, which is only being explained on this channel, which will be proven to be true when the prediction comes to pass. And so to not appreciate this is to miss entirely the point of this prediction that is from God. And the point of this video and video channel, you might as well turn off the video now if you do not appreciate this, or refuse to appreciate it because you believe in something contradictory to the controversial things that I'll be saying. But the purpose of prophecy is to prove the matter, which is why 1/3 of the Bible is prophecy. It's how, for example, I came to faith. I was not raised in any way in a Christian culture nor a Christian family, and it is through evidence, which is contained in Bible prophecy, that I came to realize that it is rationally true that the Bible is the inspired Word of God. And anyway, that's the purpose of this prediction. This is a form of prophecy. And I'm not saying that I'm a prophet at all. In fact, that's one of the reasons why I believe God has given me this responsibility, is that I do not claim to be a prophet, because there are no prophets today, and there are many people confused on that subject, which is something of another subject. But what I am saying is that I do have the authority to tell you what God is communicating through his big picture of signs because of this prediction. And I know the reason and purpose for this prediction. It is to give me a voice to tell you the truth about the controversial things that I'll be stating. And so, in summary, The point of this prediction is for you to go, oh, cool, neat, that's quite interesting. You were able to know this was going to happen ahead of time. Wow, that's pretty cool, and congratulations. No, this is not the purpose of this prediction. It's not for you to go, oh, neat, and to just dismiss whatever else comes after this. The purpose of this prediction is the information that God has used to reveal this prediction, which is only being explained on this channel. And it includes multiple controversial things that most people will disagree with, but in my opinion, after the prediction comes to pass, it would be prudent to humble yourself and re-examine what you already thought to be true, because it isn't. And that is the purpose of the prediction. So let's begin with what I wrote here. This email is documenting the prediction that singer-songwriter Paul Simon of Simon & Garfunkel will slip and fall down and severely injure his head on November 27th, 2025. And the news of this will be first reported on November 28th, 2025. Simon will die from his head injury. I do not know yet, or if it will be known. I assume that it may be revealed, and maybe it has and I haven't recognized it. But at some point, Paul Simon will die due to his head injury. I forgot to mention the connection to Elvis, because Elvis fell and hit his head in his mansion in California, and professionals now believe that that's ultimately how he died 10 years later in his other mansion in Graceland. In the bathroom, by the way, which is why the Lincoln bathroom sign on October 31st that I just mentioned. Anyway, he didn't die from his drug intake. His drug intake was in response to him coping with the autoimmune diseases that he had been suffering with ever increasingly since his head injury. And the autoimmune diseases gets into another subject regarding Elvis, which is explained many other times in other videos, but Elvis changed history when he took the polio thing, the VACC, and ends with an INE. When he took that thing, it changed history and baby boomers' perceptions of this thing, which changed dramatically the thing industry, and the rest is history. And so that's the not even the surface level of the story that God is telling through Elvis and Paul Simon. And it's just one aspect of it, the thing aspect. But that's just not even scratching the surface of the thing aspect of this story. And so that's why you need to watch all of the videos. Okay? And there's a good reason why the head is being pointed to as well. Because those who take the thing will become demonically possessed through their brains. Now, the news of Paul Simon's predicted fall and injury of his head on November 28th, 2025 will be 4,400 plus 4,400 plus 44. Again, God repeats a number 3 times for emphasis of its symbolic meaning. This gives us 44, and it hints at the 44th president, Antichrist king, who will live in a mansion. Okay, and so this is the number of days exactly after 9/11. 4,400 plus 4,400 plus 44. And on 9/11, 44 people died on the 4th hijacked plane that crashed at a 40-degree angle and created a 40-acre pit, 40 plus 40 miles outside of Pittsburgh. This is because of the demons that will rise from the bottomless pit, as described in the book of Revelation and the trumpet judgments, which follow the sound of silence that's observed in heaven, which points to Paul Simon, his first hit. The first plane to crash on 9/11 was Flight 11, and it departed Governor's Island in Boston, which is named after John Winthrop, the man who led the 11-ship flotilla. And an airplane is a ship, so that's why Flight 11. Because of Winthrop's 11-ship flotilla of Puritans to the New World. Before departing their ships into the Promised Land, Winthrop delivered a famous sermon that was derived from Deuteronomy chapter 28. In Deuteronomy chapter 28, Moses warned the Israelites before they crossed the Jordan River into the promised land of God's promises of blessings or curses that were dependent on their obedience to God's commandments. Okay, so the pilgrims saw their crossing of the Atlantic as analogous to the Israelites' crossing of the Jordan River into the promised land, because the pilgrims saw the new world as their promised land. And like the Israelites who were escaping religious persecution from the king of Egypt, the pilgrims were escaping religious persecution from the king of England. And so we have the 11-ship flotilla. By the way, also it was 101 passengers on the Mayflower that anchored on the date. The first date they anchored was the date 11/11, and it took 66 days, a number of days that was not anticipated because of a storm that blew them way off course and to Massachusetts instead of Virginia, where they were destined. Had they gone there, they wouldn't have survived. And Cape Cod is shaped geographically like a giant hook because it was God hooking them into Massachusetts to begin the age of fishing for men, which God used America, his disciple of his nation of disciples, to spread the gospel around the world. And Jesus said he wouldn't come back until the world had heard the gospel. Anyway, they anchored, and 66 days is the 11th triangular number. So they took the 11th triangular number, anchored on the date 11/11, and it was 101, which hints at 11. But it was also 11 ships in the flotilla. And the speech or the sermon that Winthrop gave, who lived on Governor's Island, which is why the Flight 11 departed Governor's Island, that speech was derived from Deuteronomy chapter 28, as I've just explained now. And so that gives us 11 and 28. That's quite interesting because of the following. Winthrop's warning to the Puritans on the 11 ships paralleled God's warning in Deuteronomy chapter 28. And this is why the news of Simon's fall will come on the date 11/28. Simon's hit song, American Tune, speaks of the pilgrims, the pilgrim passengers who crossed the Atlantic on the Mayflower, and of the journey of the Apollo 11 ship. And of course, the Mayflower is a ship, and that's why Apollo 11, because the Apollo 11 ship points to the Mayflower ship. And the journey into space, the uncharted to the new world, the moon, is analogous to the pilgrims crossing into the new world. And why is God doing all of this? To point to Winthrop's speech, which warned those who were about to step into the promised land of God's promises of blessings and curses. And what's interesting, too, is that in this description, we have a metaphor of an eagle swooping down. Well, on the tail of Flight 11 was an eagle, and it swooped down into the buildings that looked like a giant 11 in the 11th state in New York City, made of 11 letters. Flight 11 had a crew of 11. Jesus coined the phrase the 11th hour, which in ancient Israel referred to the last hour of daylight before darkness, and in English is an idiom that means last chance. Time is running out, as in last chance for America to repent and turn back to God from the disobeying of his commandments, which will lead to curses. And so part of these promised curses includes the swooping of the eagle, but also a description of walking on iron under a bronze sky, which is exactly what happened on 9/11 after the eagle swooped down. Paul Simon opened the first broadcast of Saturday Night Live in Manhattan after 9/11. It was 4 days after 9/11, and we just talked about this 4,400 plus 4,400 plus 44 days after 9/11. Actually, if we go 4,400 plus 4,400 plus 40 days, we get the date that Paul Simon sang and opened the broadcast of Saturday Night Live with his song, The Boxer. Boxing is about punching and knocking an opponent out so they collapse onto the mat. And on 9/11, the buildings collapsed. In other words, Paul Simon is symbolic of 9/11 and the beginning of the warning to turn back to God, or else just judgment and destruction. Paul Simon's fourth album with Garfunkel has the song America, and the album's name is Bookends. Paul Simon's death will be the bookend to the warning of opportunity for America to repent that has slidden away Paul Simon's hit from his fourth solo album. In other words, also, Paul Simon's first album with Garfunkel, Wednesday morning, 3 a.m., hinted at 3 and 4, because Wednesday is the fourth day of the week, and 3 a.m. in ancient Israel was the beginning of the fourth watch of the night. So Wednesday morning, 3 a.m. gives us 3 and 4. This album was made after Wally Amos, the founder of Famous Amos Cookies, lured them into his office, Simon and Garfunkel, with cookies, and then signed them to their first label. And then he went on, Wally Amos, to found Famous Amos Cookies, the biggest cookie company in America, because it's a sign from God. Well, Wally Amos hints at the first chapter of the book of Amos, and the repeating idiom in this chapter, for 3 transgressions and for 4. And this idiom means the tolerable limit of transgressions has been exceeded, and now judgment and destruction are unavoidable. Which is why I say that Paul Simon's death will be the bookend to the opportunity to repent, and now with his death, it will be symbolized that the opportunity or the transgressions has been exceeded, and now judgment is unavoidable. And so with Paul Simon's death, we can discontinue the hope that many still have for this so-called or supposed anticipated revival that we all know isn't going to happen. But if you didn't know that, when Paul Simon's death happens, then you will know. And so that's what's going on here. After being signed to a record label by Wally Amos, the founder of Famous Amos Cookies, Simon and Garfunkel produced their first album titled Wednesday Morning, 3 a.m. Wednesday is the fourth day of the week, and in ancient Israel, the fourth watch of the night began at 3 a.m. The Hebrew idiom for 3 transgressions and for 4 is repeated in the first chapter of the book of Amos, which has 15 verses. This idiom means that the tolerable limit of transgressions has been exceeded and judgment is unavoidable. On the date 115, as in Amos chapter 1 with its 15 verses, in 2019, Simon had a dream in which a voice told him to produce his 7 Psalms album. The British vocal ensemble Voices 8, I don't know if that's how you pronounce it, maybe it's Latin or something, are guests on the album. 8 is equal to 4 plus 4. But also 8 is relevant because of Paul Simon, because of Revelation chapter 8, verse 1, and the sound of silence in heaven that precedes the 7 trumpet judgments, which is why the 7 Psalms album. Okay, so the British ensemble is Voices 8. It's a guest on the album. 8 is equal to 4 plus 4. The dream about making the 7 Psalms album on the date 115, which hints at Amos 1 with its 15 verses, and the idiom again is for 3 transgressions and for 4 in 2019 with its guests Voices 8, which is hints at 4 plus 4, is 7, as in 7 Psalms, times 44 plus 44 plus 44 days before the predicted news of Paul Simon's fall on November 28, 2025. The theme of the album is the end of life and crossing over into the afterlife. And so that's why we would expect this profound connection from the dream that Simon had that pointed to, for example, for 3 transgressions and for 4, and the voice that that instructed him to make the album, hence the guests on the album Voices 8, We'll just call it voice is 8. Who cares if they forgot to put the I in the word there? Voice is 8, okay? And that's amazing because we got the 7 times 44 plus 44 plus 44. Not only that, Paul Simon's a theme in Paul Simon Signs is the mansion in which the 44th president will dwell, and that mansion has 44 plus 44 plus 44 rooms, as mentioned earlier. But again, we got the for 3 transgressions and for 4, and we could even add this too. The bridge, as in Paul Simon's big hit, Bridge Over Troubled Water, in God's Signs is the same symbol as a door, which is the symbol that is the 4th letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And Paul Simon is Jewish. So anyway, you can see this is a profound connection here. From the date of the dream, we have this profound connection with the 7, because the dream is about the 7 Psalms album. And it's 7 times 44 plus 44 plus 44. And the album, because the dream was about a voice, the album has a voice. As guests, the voice is 8. 4 plus 4.